And we welcome you to Reflections in the Round. I'm Linda Cavanaugh.
And I'm Bart Connor.
And we are going to have a heck of a good time this afternoon. We have a lot of people who graduated from this school, this College of Journalism here in Norman. And we're here to reminisce and reflect on the times that we had.
Well, I have a lot of great memories. I came here as a gymnast, and of course I was thrilled to attend the University of Oklahoma. I started out, in fact, in the Aerospace, Nuclear, and Mechanical Engineering School.
Look at you!
And I discovered it was really hard. I'll never forget, I went to France for the World Gymnastics Championships. I took all these books with me.
Yeah.
I set them on the desk in my hotel room, and for 3 weeks I never opened them. When I came back, I'm like, wow, I'm lost. And not only that, but I realized I wasn't terribly passionate about aerospace, nuclear, and mechanical engineering. Ironically, I'm standing literally in my backyard talking to my neighbor, a professor named Bill Baxter, professor of public relations here.
Yes.
And he said, what have you been doing lately? I said, well, I've been traveling around the world. I was in New York the other day doing a promotional campaign for Minute Maid, promoting their connection with the Olympics. And he said, wow, you're doing PR. You know, there's a college. They teach that at OU. I'm like, well, that's so cool. I want to do that.
I know
So
it.
I'm so glad he was my neighbor, because that's I chose that degree, and I have to say it's been obviously one of the most important decisions of my life, because everything I do now, whether it's related to my sport or the nonprofit work I do, being a good storyteller or being a good communicator is key, and I'm sure it's the same in your business.
Oh, and you're so very good at it. I mean, anytime you see Bart on, he is perfection. He joined us the other day on the 4:30 show, and he was so great talking about Diane Nyad's swim from Cuba to Florida. So always nice to have Bart involved with anything. I graduated in 1973 in general editorial. They didn't have broadcasting then. And of course, I had no clue what I was going to do. I thought I was going to be a teacher. And I found out that I could get a scholarship. And I thought, if somebody's going to pay me to study journalism, this is what I'm interested in. So that's how I got into the journalism curriculum. And it was wonderful.
You told me today you wanted to share a story about Bob Berry Sr.
Oh my gosh, the stories you could tell. But the point was that you learn in college, but you never quit learning. And I learned so much from Bob Sr. because of his attitude. He had such a great attitude. Anytime anything happened, he said you can either get upset about it or enjoy it. And he at the time was the voice of the OSU Cowboys. And we were in Kansas City because they had made it to the Final Four. And so we get up there, and he does the broadcast. He broadcasts it, and then it's time to leave, and so he packs up his little briefcase, which carried his radio paraphernalia, and he went out to get into his car, and he couldn't remember where he'd parked it. And it was a rental car, and he could not only not remember where he parked it, he couldn't remember what color it was. So he's out there in this huge parking lot. And so instead, he just walks right back in. He gets a locker, and he puts his radio gear in this locker, locks it up, goes to the concession stand. He gets 4 hot dogs and 3 Diet Cokes, and he goes to the top of the stadium, and he watches all of the games from the top of the arena. And when it's all finished, and the janitors have come in and they've started sweeping up, then he goes to the locker, he unlocks it, he gets his stuff out. He goes out to the parking lot. There are 14 cars left. And he tries the key in each one of them until he was finally finished. And that's the kind of attitude that if you take that away from what you're doing, you always enjoy your job, no matter what it is. You're always learning.
I'll share one story about Bob Berry Sr. The last time I saw him, I always asked him for a joke. He was always good for a joke. I said, can you tell me one quick joke? And he goes, Bart, if first you don't succeed, skydiving's not for you.
That's good.
As you can tell, we could probably fill an hour and a half ourselves here
Yeah.
just chatting about this, but we're so thrilled that you all are here, and we're eager to hear your stories. So why don't we start here with Bob Burke, who's one of the great storytellers in Oklahoma history. Do you have a story or a memory you'd like to share about your experiences here, Bob?
I do, Bart, and I think I have a theory that our great century of the journalism school at the University of Oklahoma is not about places and events. It's really not about the building that's so wonderful now. It's not about Copeland Hall and some of our more inferior confines, but it's about the people. Our heritage is about our people. I can look around the room and remember going to school with Joe Foote. I got him his first job at KTOK Radio.
Was he any good?
He was very good newsman, But for a while, he was the only weekend guy that wanted the weekends off, And then Mike Betcher replaced me at KTOK when I graduated from college. But it's the people, it's the professors, the administration, the students. The greatest thing about my experience in addition to what I learned that I use every day as a lawyer and writing books, is that the lifelong friendships. I mean, Joe's been my friend for all these, what, we've been out of school 15 years now, Joe? I mean, I look around the room and others who have just been my lifelong friends. Bob Berry was a second father to me. Because, again, as somebody who'd been in the school here but hired me for $25 a game as the first color analyst of the OU basketball network. But that was a great increase for me because I was making $15 doing the public address at the old field house. But the people that I met during the time, professors who continued to be resources for all of their lives, I have outlived most of them, but they were wonderful people. And then President Bourne forbids me from telling lots of other stories, like the fact that I was my own advisor during all of college. But that's another story for another day. Only because Professor had died the first semester, and they wouldn't let me enroll without having somebody sign it. So I just signed Dr. Wrestler's name for the rest of school. Or I forgot. I'm not supposed to tell that story.
Aren't you a lawyer? Aren't you a lawyer? Isn't there something against it?
Oh, the statute is run on that.
And those are the kind of stories we want to hear. So we'd like to hear it from all of you. But Melissa, I think that you had some stories you wanted to share.
Sure, absolutely. My last semester as a Gaylord student was the first semester of this building. And so while I don't have as many memories in this building, it has traveled with me. I haven't lived in Oklahoma until recently since graduation. So wherever I go, I can say that I went to the Gaylord College of Journalism, and everyone knows right where that is. They know it belongs at the University of Oklahoma. Their reputation precedes itself. And I've been able to network through using Gaylord College.
And what did you study?
I studied public relations.
And what do you do now?
I now do the PR and marketing for the National Weather Center down on South Campus.
Good for you. Good for you.
It's very exciting to have Mike Betcher here, and it's interesting enough, a few minutes ago in the previous session, I saw you look at your phone and hurriedly head out of the room, and I thought, oh, we're bombing Syria. You have some story.
It was Syria related, but we weren't bombing. Anytime I get a call from a 212 area code, I suddenly, electricity goes up my spine. They're trying to find me. So, but Dean Foote and Bob Burke and I are all brothers of the Red Rover at KTOK. And when I was a student here, I was working at KTOK. I was working full time, and I was taking a full load. Something had to give, and it wasn't the job at KTOK. But if you had a job where you had to drive around and they would come to you reporting, and they'd say, "Come over, Red Rover," and then you'd go, "This is Mike Betcher in Red Rover, over." It wasn't. I thought it was sometimes embarrassing, but we had this beautiful red car with the blue light on top. So my buddies and I thought, and I didn't think it was that good of an idea, but they thought if we drove around Sorority Row in the Red Rover, we could pick up girls. And
how'd that work out for you?
I'm still looking for a date. No, it didn't. It didn't work out too well. But I remember I had great experiences here, and I love this university. And I'd be the guy in El Salvador or South Africa, or wherever I was based at the time, on shortwave, trying to tune in to listen to the OU games, and then see glimpses of you on doing your great things, and say that's one of us. Being an Okie is not kind of like being in the mafia, really. It's not criminally related, but we all pull for each other, and we'll crack legs for each other if we have to. But I had one professor, and I was working full time, and I was not a good student. Because I was trying to juggle all this, and plus I just wasn't a good student. Did I say I wasn't a good student? And one of the professors, I won't name him, wrote on one of my papers, "Think you should consider another line of work." You know something? And I still remember that, which is key, because that motivated me the rest of my life. And so that had a great impact on me, and I was going to show him. And something? He did me a great favor. He did me a great favor. So I have a lot of great memories here.
Thank you, Mike.
And Bob mentioned the importance of friendship, and Cherokee Ballard has been a friend to so many. She's worked in so many different. Do you mind standing up? That'd be all right.
to.
Tell us the year you graduated and what you studied.
1985, and I graduated with a degree in journalism with an emphasis in radio, television, and film. That doesn't exist, I don't believe, in this school anymore, but I was so happy to have that degree and have the great experiences that I had here at OU. Really, it taught me persistence. They taught me that this field is tough. One of our professors walked in and said, okay, if you expect to walk out of here and make anything more than minimum wage, you probably should go somewhere else, because you probably won't make much more than that in your first job. And I didn't. I think it was at Channel 4. They offered me minimum wage. Sorry, no, that's all right. A little bit higher, maybe. But, you know, it was not about the money. You don't get into this field for the money, and I think that was the persistence and the love of journalism is what I learned here, and it carried me through almost 25 years in the field, and proudly working with you, and then our great friend Brad Edwards, who really taught me the meaning of that persistence. The first assignment I had, he said, okay, Cherokee, it's your first interview. You need to go out and do this interview. I really can use you tomorrow. You're going to interview Stuart Meyer with the Oklahoma Highway Patrol. And I said, great, okay, oh my gosh. And I was telling everybody calling. And then I found out I had to be there at 4 in the morning. So that's how I knew. That's why Brad wanted me to go do it. However, forever grateful for that experience and just the persistence and love of this university. So proud to be here and to be a graduate of OU.
And Cherokee has been so successful in any career that she's undertaken, and I'll tell you why. Because she will do anything, and she's probably blocked this out of her mind, but we were doing an investigation on nursing homes.
Oh.
Mm-hmm. See, she forgot about it.
No, I didn't. It was hard
and
to forget.
so we had asked Cherokee to go in as a nurse's aide. Undercover with a mic, and she did, and it turned out to be an incredibly enlightening experience. And Cherokee was a young woman, didn't have to do this, got up in the morning, went
I
for
did too. I
several
was
days.
afraid to turn you down. Linda asked me how to do it. No.
She did a great job, and it was really fine journalism that you
Well,
did.
thank you.
Thank you very much.
Andy Rieger is here, and Andy, you want to share a few memories?
Well, I was here in the mid to late 70s, and I spent a lot of time on the student newspaper on the Daily, and then later came back as the advisor. But I always remember the Daily was always on the cutting edge of all the new drugs that came into Norman. I always thought that was sort of interesting. And being from Norman, I came in and worked, I think, as a freshman on there. And I remember the first time I'd ever known of a man living with a woman who was not his wife, his sister, or his mother. And I went home and told my parents that. And I said, that is the most interesting thing I've ever heard of. People living together, not married, you know. So I thought that was interesting. But one of my favorite professors was Ralph Sewell. And some of y'all remember Ralph. And Ralph was retired from the Oklahoman, went back and got a law degree, and then came to OU and taught. And so Ralph taught these classes where we took students to the national political conventions. And some of y'all may have gone on those. And so I remember in 1980, I went to the Republican National Convention in Detroit, and Ralph took a bunch of us. And I was already working at the Oklahoman full time, and so he made me drive one of the old Plymouth station wagons the university had up there. And then when we got there, I remember he brought Professor Bob Peterson. Anybody remember Bob Peterson with him? And Bob was probably, at that time, Bob was probably 85 years old then. And we're going into the convention on the first day. We have our credentials and everything. And Ralph stops me, and he says, hold out your hand. And he puts a vial of nitroglycerin tablets in my hand, and he said, your job is to follow Mr. Pete around. He's having some heart issues, and I want you to follow him. So the entire convention, I was scared this man was going to die on my watch.
Right. Thank you, Andy.
And again, we're talking about friends, and I see so many faces here that I've known for so many years. And Gwen, if you would tell us your full name, when you graduated, what you studied, and what you're doing now.
So you're telling me I have an old face, Linda. I'm very proud of this old face. My name is Gwen Louise Calvert Falconer Lippert. 5 names, 5 times the fun, only 2 husbands, and this is my best husband. Unlike Linda, who got to keep her name, you know, when you start in broadcasting, you keep the name that brought you. And I was Falconer And my Lippert husband has been nice enough to let me keep it so I can stay on the air. I actually was a journalism advertising graduate. I graduated in 1974, and I had the beauty today of sitting with my favorite professor at the luncheon. Frank Heaston was there, and I'm sure all of you have this feeling if you could go back and tell that professor. And not only did I tell him how very, very special he is, I got my picture taken with him, and I kissed my professor. But I have so many memories, and Carol Burr, I see you here. I have so many incredible memories with Paul Masson and all those people. I was fortunate enough to be the roughneck queen at the Game of the Century, 1971. Last century, last millennium. You can tell my students have beat me up. I'm a professor at Oklahoma City Community College. I also work for OETA when they ask for money, and I am still at KTOK Radio. Red Rover over, yes. But probably one of my most memorable things is I was in Joe Holland's class, Governor Atkins, and I remember Anona Adair, who was the head of student life then, called me and said, Gwen, I know you have, can you come to the South Oval tonight? And I went, oh, I'm sorry, I have a final. And she said, I will get you excused and you can take it on another night. And I said, well, sure. Why would you want me to come to the South Oval? Well, we'd like to have a few student leaders there to help control the streak. Do you all remember the streak? Okay, for those of you that don't, the streak is when people on campus would take off their clothes and run up and down the South Oval. And the people lined up like the football run on, you know how when the Sooners run on and the cheerleaders, they lined up, and I, being a student leader, got to stand at the beginning. And when they all came running out, I was supposed to say, okay, here they come. You know, we were supposed to keep order and all that stuff. And all I remember is I saw things I've never seen before. And the last guy out said, this looks like fun. He dropped trowel right in front of me and said, would you hold my pants? But the Gaylord, no, we didn't have the Gaylord College. The Copeland Hall and my time with Frank Heaston in journalism advertising has been one of the greatest blessings of my life. And I could tell a story on Joe Foote. Would you like a story on Joe Foote?
Joe's shaking his head no. Look at that look.
Years later, I came back to OU and worked in public relations, and I loved working here. It was fantastic. And I applied for a Rotary fellowship, and I was assured that I had all the credentials and it would just, you know, be a formality and all that stuff. And so I came to the interview and all that stuff, and in walks Joe Foote. And I said, Joe, what are you doing these days? Oh, well, Gwen, I am the press secretary for Carl Albert, who was the, what at the time, Mr. Foote? Dean Foote? Yeah, the Speaker of the House of Representatives, right. I said, oh, really? Did you fly in? Yes, I flew in his private plane for the interview. And I said, wow. And it was at that moment I knew my chances were.
It's a thrill to have Patty Moore here. Patty has had enormous success in the for-profit and the nonprofit world, and she sits on several boards, and her guidance has been incredible. So we're thrilled to have you here, Patty. You have a story you'd like to share?
Well, I've got a couple of stories. I was thinking about people were talking about when they decided they wanted to go into journalism. Well, I decided I wanted to major in advertising when I was a little girl. My mom restricted television, and I could watch 2 shows in the afternoons. I got to watch Bewitched and Dark Shadows. Well, thankfully, I was more intrigued with Bewitched. I wanted to do what Darren Stevens did. I wanted to go into advertising. I used to play advertising with my Barbie dolls. And I was just so fascinated by Darren Stevens, not by Samantha, and definitely not by Dark Shadows. But so I knew that I wanted to come to OU. I knew I wanted to major in I thought advertising, and then I met Professor Danley, and he actually talked me into majoring in public relations. So I'm a 1979 public relations graduate, and as I look back on my career, I absolutely believe, as I have worked in public relations, worked in agencies, worked in corporate America at Sonic, what I learned here, which was how to ask questions, has really been the bedrock of my career. One more story, I also learned courage. I had Professor Davis for news writing, as many of you did. She was the toughest teacher, toughest, scariest boss that I've ever encountered in my career. And at the end of the semester, I discovered that I thought she had made a mistake on my grades, that I thought I got an A in her class, which nobody got an A in her class, but she'd given me a B. And so I summoned up all the courage I possibly had, and I went in to talk to her, despite my friends saying, don't do it, she's going to chew you up and spit you out, she will never change the grade. I went in there, showed her my grade. She had missed a bonus assignment, a story I'd gotten in the Norman transcript, and she changed my grade. And I got an A in her class, and right then and there, I realized that courage is everything. And I've had a lot of courage since then, because I thought if I could stand up to Professor Davis, I can stand up to CEOs everywhere. So anyway, that's my story.
Love it. Thank you very much.
And we want to hear all your stories, so raise your hand if you have a story you'd like to share. Jerry Askins, the year you graduated?
I graduated in 1975, Linda, and you may be sorry that you asked me this story. One story that I have to tell you is Linda and I were in the same sorority, and so when I moved in as a sophomore, Linda was a senior and had a column in the Oklahoma Daily once a week. And I can remember, I know you all are shocked, but there were some people that were a little bit afraid of Linda Kavanaugh when she was in college, because she was so clever. She was so witty. She had such great writing skills. And I used to get included in the group that would sit in the room and try to help her come up with ideas for what her column was going to be on, sometimes based upon what Jimmy, now known as Argus Hamilton, would write like 2 days before. And, really, that was inspiring to me, to be included in that group and to be able to feel like sometimes having some input. And so thank you for including me and giving me the opportunity to do that. I was a public relations major, and as I have told some of you before, I have always been amazed at how I never anticipated a life in public service, but how public relations has been so incredibly important in every step of my public service that I went through. And Paul Danley worked so hard to help me find an internship. And I wanted to work at the zoo, and then later as lieutenant governor, I got to do a lot of things with the zoo. And there were things I tried to do that just didn't work out. And all of a sudden, I got this opportunity to be an intern at a brand new hospital that had this cool media stuff in it. And I felt like I was driving to Kansas to get there, because it's now known as Mercy Health Center. And here I am years later, now working at the Stevenson Cancer Center on the OU Health Sciences campus in a field related to healthcare, using some of those skills that we utilized back then as an intern. So you just never know where all of those steps are going to take you while you're here.
Absolutely true.
Bill Hancock, you raised your hand. Would you like to share something?
Hey, Bart. Yes. We all think about the people. Louise Moore, Grace Ray, but there were two people that everybody was scared of. Jack Whitaker had a nickname. Does anybody remember the nickname of Jack? Slash and Jack, of course. We were scared to death of Jack Whitaker. The other one was W.C. Vanderworth, the shop foreman in the Daily Back Shop. Well, Jack Whitaker had a heart of gold, and whatever happened to all of our term papers that we wrote? Remember those about the history of newspapers in Oklahoma? Carol, do you know, are they on file somewhere? I hope. Library, they're there? Oh my goodness, how cool is that? And Van was an artist. If you remember, the Daily always looked great. It was printed to perfection, and that was because of Van, this guy that everybody hated. And my life was turned around when I got a job working for Van in the print shop. It was a remarkable experience for me. They had the hippies in the front, Larry Chilnick and that crew, and those of us in the back shop were kind of the good old Okie salt of the earth people. But Van had a soft spot in his heart for the guys up front. And one more last quick story about professors. The time I was lucky enough at Joe's invitation to go to the JMAC awards ceremony, and I talked about my professor friends, one of which was Joe Holland, who I loved. And there I am on the dais, and I said, Joe Holland's one of my favorites, and I'm sorry he's no longer with us.
Uh-oh.
Well, after the dinner, who should come up to shake my hand but Joe Holland?
Oops.
I saw you raise your hand.
Yes. Linda Johnson. I graduated in '67 in journalism with a specialty in PR. And you hit very close to home when you brought up Van. I was the editor when we went, and for those of you that graduated a lot later, we switched from letterpress, pardon me, to offset. This was huge technology change at that time. And Van was doing it kicking and screaming the entire time, not wanting to do it. I was here. I saw that they could run a full-page picture. They knew how to do color. I go and say, I want color the first day. Well, no, we're not ready. I said, Van, you're never going to tell me you're ready. I got the color, but then come Texas OU weekend, I decided, and as editor, I didn't have direct control of the front page, but I went to my managing editor, Margie Hansen, and told her that I was taking responsibility for the front page that day because I didn't want anybody else to get in trouble. And so I printed Beat the Hell Out of Texas in red ink. Wonderful. And I took it to the back the night before, and Van stood me down. He said, you can't print hell. And I said, you don't have control over editorial content. I said, I'm responsible for editorial content. We're printing it. So, of course, the staff went along knowing, I kept telling them, and Ms. Moore knew I was doing it. And I told her, I said, I take full responsibility for, don't blame anybody else. So the next day, I'm in the office, Dr. Cross calls, and everybody just, it's Dr. Cross for you. And the man was amazing. I love him to death. He was one of the best experiences at OU. And so he starts talking, are you going to the game? Well, what time are you leaving? He said, he said, it takes a long time to get down there. He said, be careful driving. Continues, still not word one about the Daily. And finally I said, Dr. Cross, is this call about the front page of the Daily? And I said, did you get calls? And he said, well, yeah, I heard from some alums and from some faculty, and I told him I'd call you, and he said, I've called and we've talked, and if we win tomorrow, he said, you can print it every day of the year, I don't care. We beat Texas for the first time in 9 years. Wow. And that Tuesday, we ran our first full-page, front-page picture, Jim McKenzie being carried off the field at the Cotton Bowl, and he dropped dead that spring from recruiting Jack Mildren. I've never been so happy that we exercised that opportunity.
What a great story.
Yeah, wonderful.
Great story.
Wonderful, wonderful. At great risk, I invite Howard Price to share some of your incredible memories, not just because you were an outstanding gymnast years ago in the Chicago suburban area where I'm from, but also because you're on the...
I coached you, and I showed you how to do flip-flops in your young.
Well, that's how you remember it, but...
Actually, some of us go back. I can't tell Joe Foote stories because he knows too much about me. But boy, if we're not on camera, I can tell you some great Foote stories. But Bobby and Joe and I, we worked at this little radio station also called KUVY. It was a wire wireless station, but we had some wonderful advisors. Besides Ansel Ressler, who was my advisor and died, I also had Sherm Lawton, who was my advisor and died. And like you, nobody wanted to be my advisor again, Bob. But Ressler had this wonderful class, an announcing class. And he helped you learn how to speak and how to to enunciate and project, which my wife has never forgiven him for. Well, he would bring in this paper, and we would sit in the news booth, and he would sit in the control room, and he would point, and it was all cold copy. And sometimes reading cold copy is not the easiest thing in the world, but for me, he decided to have a little fun. And Ansel was a great guy, and he had a wonderful sense of humor, but you didn't play too many tricks on him. I did. And here's this piece of copy, and it's all about music that I really don't care about. I was a rock and roller, and he has this wonderful announcement for me to read about classical music. And I'm going through it, and it dawns on me, I can do a number on Wrestler. And there it is, and I talk about the New York Philharmonic is doing a piece from The Barber of Seville. His jaw dropped down, and he points to the door, and that's it. And I still got an A in the class, but you talked about Dr. Cross. I was at OU for I don't know how many decades. I did everything I could to stay out of Vietnam, and OU was very helpful to do that. So I was working at KOCO at the time doing sports, and I would come back and forth all the time. And there was one basketball game, and Dr. Cross was sitting where he usually sat, right there in the center court. And I'm there with my little Bell and Howell camera. None of this stuff. I mean, this is unbelievable stuff that you guys have now. And Dr. Cross looked at me. He said, "Price, are you still here?" And I said, "Dr. Cross, I feel like I got here before you, and I have a funny feeling I'm going to be here long after you."
Thank you, Howard.
And we've been talking about storytellers, and one of the best in the business, in my opinion, is Bill Moore. What a great job you've done in your career. Would you tell them a little bit about what you studied here, the year you graduated, that type of thing?
Okay. Quick story about Linda.
I'm not sure I like these.
No, this is good. This is good. Her appreciation for the significance of broadcasting and history in Oklahoma. When I was at the Oklahoma History Center, we were building our film vault, and we knew the Channel 4 collection was in danger of being lost, the 16 millimeter film collection. And we came to Linda, and she helped us get it. And it was, that's a treasure. That's so many decades of some of the best stories of Oklahoma. So thank you for doing that, Linda.
Very welcome.
I graduated in '79 with the degree in professional writing, but I had studied under Ned Hockman prior to that, and I wanted to tell a Ned story. If any of you had him, you'll appreciate this. Ned was telling us in class how you had to be prepared no matter what. And so he said, if you're driving down the street and your film camera's on the seat next to you, and the sun goes behind a cloud, you reach over and you adjust that f-stop because something might happen.
And you're always prepared.
So I raised my hand and I said, what do you do when he said, adjust it again. Didn't get to ask the cloud question.
People have memories of Ned because he was like the Energizer Bunny. He just kept going, and he had such a great gift of making you enthused about what you were doing. And I heard somebody talking about the fact that when he was teaching to begin with, do you remember this? That girls and boys couldn't go into the darkroom together? Do you remember that? Wow. How things have changed, huh?
I think Gwen was in there. She
She said she didn't take it for that reason.
Bonnie, you want to share a story?
Sure, thank you. I'm a graduate from 1980, and I graduated with broadcast journalism. And everyone's been commenting on all the equipment, and it's wonderful. But what they did for me, anyway, was I got on-the-job training. So as an intern, I got to work at Channel 4, and I worked with Linda. And I also got to jump on a trampoline with you one time.
Oh, yeah, I'll never forget.
I didn't think you would. I know I haven't. But I was thinking about OU, and what I love about it, it feels like a nice, warm blanket, like nothing went wrong here. Somebody took care of me, anyway, and I just really did love the time I spent here.
Fantastic. Thank you.
You know, so many years have passed here, and so many changes have come about that we accept as normal anymore. But if you go back to the 60s and the 50s and the early 70s, there weren't that many women going into journalism. And the lady here has certainly made her mark. If you'd tell them your full name and the year you graduated.
Joanne Orr graduated in 1952, and as you say, that's several decades back from when you all are talking about the primitive days. That's when the shop had linotypes, and when they went to press, the whole building shook. It was like thunder in the basement. And, you know, when you were typing your story on a manual typewriter, it's not quiet. That building had a lot of noise. This building, I don't hear anything. It's amazing, the contrast. And you could smell the chemicals from the darkroom. Anybody remember this? Mm-hmm. And also the covered wagon, which again, does anybody remember the covered wagon? It was a humor magazine that ended up being censored by the president, Cross, and withdrawn, big flap. And thereafter, every time it was published, I was on the staff, every time it was published, it had to be reviewed in its entirety by the Publications Board before it could go to press. So we weren't always angels back then, by any means.
What made you think about going into it? Because it was an unusual field for women.
Well, I majored in news editorial. They didn't have public relations then. But somewhere I took a wrong turn and spent 35 years in public relations at the Department of Transportation with information services, adopt a highway, don't lay that trash in Oklahoma, wildflowers. And I guess the high point of my career, you might say, was flying with Shirley Bellman in the state plane down to spend the night with Lady Bird Johnson at her ranch because of the wildflowers. Mm-hmm. So that's where all that good work that Joe Holland did to teach us. And I also had ethics from H.H. Herbert. It stays with you. And if you can write a good story, you can do anything.
It's true. Now, we want to hear all of your stories, so if we're missing somebody, feel free to hold up your hand.
Sandy, you raised your hand.
I did. Sandy Davis. I graduated in 1977 with a degree in radio, TV news. I promptly went to work in print, but I wanted to talk about Janetta Davis. I'm sorry to tell you, I did get A's in her class, but she taught so well. The use of information resources pays off to this day. I can pretty much find anything, and she gave us all those skills. And then I also took news writing from her, and I remember how she hated the athletes. If you were a jock, she would call you out in class, and she thought she had Jimbo Elrod.
She liked Bert.
You know,
Bart.
He had the red.
What was your name?
Dot right there. Anyway, she said, and I bet you drive a big Cadillac and all this. And he goes, I drive a Volkswagen, ma'am. And she was kind of bum-fuzzled after that. But years later, I was in a bus with Governor Walters and a bunch of travel writers. And we were seeing parts of the state, and we were writing stories about the state. And that helped me write a column that ran in the 90s called There's No Place Like Oklahoma. That got me a Redbud Award. So thanks to Walters for that. But a woman stood up in the bus, and she walked back, and she said, I taught you. I'm like, yes. She goes, I'm Janetta Davis. And she said, I love your writing. And she stopped the bus, and didn't stop the bus, but she had everybody be quiet, and she said, her story on Eskimo Joe's was just fabulous, and she just kept going. I couldn't believe that made the whole experience at OU worth it, to have a professor come and tell me that I had done a good job. But I also want to bring up Mac Palmer. Does anybody remember him? Thank you. Thank you. Journalism law. I know 2 things about journalism law, and neither of them can be told in this room.
You're just going to leave it at that?
I am, because if you had Mac Palmer, you know what they are. One is about Michigan, and the other's about Mickey Mouse, and that's all I'm going to say. But my degree here has helped me, and now I freelance, and I recently jumped up to the big time and got to do some stuff for USA Today. So this has paid off, and I had the best time here, although I commuted. I didn't know anybody except Joy Donovan is the only person that I graduated with that I know. So anyway, it's wonderful to be here and meet all of you.
Thank you, Sandy.
Great stories. Your name, the year you graduated.
James Tyree. I was here primarily in the 86 to 90, but then I left for Oregon for 4 years and finished in 95. My experience here, there's basically Mach 1 as a student and Mach 2 as an instructor. I came here as a very proud newspaper guy. You know, I was news communication. One of my best friends, Tom Smith, he was a broadcast guy, so I always called him the pseudo-journalist, you know, because real ones are print, you know, that sort of thing. I learned a lot in my classes, but my real education was with the Oklahoma Daily at Copeland Hall. It was my home away from home. I spent a lot of time there. Learned a lot from Chuck House. Learned a lot from Andy Rieger, big time, still do. And just the various assignments, I just learned so much there. And so went on, became a reporter for almost 20 years and came back as an adjunct instructor for writing for the mass media. And so working with sophomores primarily who are starting to get into it, much of it was in the very same classroom that I had the 2033 lab. So that was a very interesting deal. But what was so cool about that is you see students who are very young and don't know a great deal, who at the beginning might write like a lead that's 5 or 6 sentences, that sort of thing. Or when they're beginning to interview people and they say, hey, I emailed this person and they never responded. And I said, well, did you call them? Did you go over there? You can do that? You know. Hate picking up the phone, young people. It's weird. But anyway, you go from there to by the end of the semester, you see the growth, you know, of how much they've learned, how much they've grown. And then you see them a year or two after that when they're on the verge of graduating. And the wonderful things that they do here at the college and throughout. And it's like, holy cow, this college is in really, really good hands.
And what great faculty we have.
Yeah, yeah. Great faculty, great students.
Mm-hmm.
You know, many of us went to school when Copeland Hall was the center, and of course, now all the students are used to this incredible building, digital technology. Those soft leather couches are nice, right?
Yeah.
And
Nice.
Chindon, you raised your hand. You'd like to share something. She's a recent graduate, graduated last year.
Yes, I'm only talking because Kathy Adams and Christine Lazalier asked me, and I love them to death, so bear with me here. Okay, you know, like Bob, I cherish most are the people who I've come across here, people who are still in my life, my support system. I knew that I was going to find a great support system here before I was even a student here. I was here for a week through OIDJ, Oklahoma Institute for Diversity in Journalism. And in that week, we learned print, web, TV, everything. And that week, I was so nervous to tell Professor Chavez and everyone that I was going to have to miss part of the program because I was going to get my citizenship. I was so nervous because I was like, what if they think I'm weird? What if they think I was here illegally? Like all these things. I was like so nervous. So I was like, I have a doctor's appointment. They were like, why did you schedule it, you know, during this week? And I was like, I had no, so then I was like, wait, you know, I'm lying. So I told them, I was like, really, I'm getting my citizenship. And they were like, oh my gosh. Like, I mean, they were just so supportive. And they were like, can we turn it into a story? And I was like, well, I'm not quite that ready yet. But then next year, they did actually come back and did a story on it. But I think the most support I've ever gotten from any group of people was from the Gaylord College, especially my senior year of college when I was working to get my mother over here from Vietnam. And I knew she was going to get to come over eventually, but I wanted her here in time for my graduation. I've moved here with my father when I was 4, and so she had given up so much for me. I wanted her to see the product of her sacrifice. And so through the help of President Boren and his son Dan, I went to D.C. I pushed for it. We pushed for the Vietnamese embassy over there. I mean, it was a rigorous process, but everyone here from Dean Foote to Dean Hockett to Kathy to Kristen, I mean, everyone, my professors, they were like, you know, if you have to miss anything, we can make up for it, all that. Anyway, long story short, the week of finals, here I am getting ready to graduate. I'm supposed to be studying 24/7. I get a call that my mother had gotten her visa, but she was too scared to get on a plane by herself, so I was gonna have to come get her. So I was like, oh my gosh, like I'm supposed to take my finals in a couple of days, and my mother is wanting me to fly halfway across the world. And so I approached professors like Peter Gade, and I was like, this is such a weird question, but can I please go to Vietnam during your final? And is that okay? And every single professor was like, absolutely, take your final when you come back. You know, we're so happy for you. There's nothing, if there's anything we can do, please let us know. So I went to Vietnam. I even wrote my graduation speech on the plane. I was half delirious. So I hope it made sense at graduation. In the end, I had my father and my mother, we've been apart for 18 years, and in the front row of my graduation, and I'm supposed to be giving this speech, and I was just so emotional. I don't think anything came out of my mouth, but you know, everyone was so supportive, and they told me I did a great job. So there you go, the support system again. But again, I don't think I could have had such a great college career in a senior year and accomplished so much without the support of Gaylord College faculty and staff and my classmates and everyone else. So thank you so much for being a part of my life.
It's a beautiful story.
Good story.
Wonderful. Congratulations.
Your name and what year you graduated?
I'm Janet Evans, and I know Chin, and I'll get to that in a second, but I graduated in 1985, but really should have been out in 83, but you know how life gets in the way of those things. And I worked at KGOU when it became an NPR station. And I don't know if anybody else is here from that time, but it was phenomenal because it was like someone had opened a candy store to us. And I loved radio from the time I was a kid in Kansas City and listened to KCMO or KOMA and all those institutional legendary radio stations. And so my experiences at KGOU, we got to do everything. If we goofed up, it didn't matter. But we got better and stronger. So before I even was ready to graduate, finally, I had worked at WKY. I had worked at some other the local station at the time. I think it was KNOR here in town. But after graduation, I ended up at KOMA, and then I ended up at KEBC, driving a car with sirens and buttons, and were told to take the microphone and the unit that we had, the Marty system. And so I drove late at night through places I should not have been allowed to drive and reported and did an entire newscast from the car in the middle of the night. And it is a wow, because I'm a big advocate, and she knows very well that I am promoting radio always. And what I mean by that is, if you want to learn a stand-up, if you want to know how to ad-lib, you know this, Linda, is that you've got to think on your feet. And the best practice is, yes, be a storyteller. Always be a storyteller. Be able to write lead sentences and complete sentences. But you know that experience is going to travel the world with you. And she's a friend of Betty Wynn. I went to work for Lady Bird Johnson's radio station for 8 years and was her news director. And Betty Wynn was one of my 13 interns that I took on in one semester. Well, we only had 6 reporters. I'm the news director. And when I started reporting and having 18, 19, 20-hour days, I decided that we needed some help. So UT, unlike the fabulous Oklahoma, they did not have the same richness of journalism that we do. And so Betty came out. Now you both know each other. And so then I met her last year in October. So the big story is that we are a big group and that we are a family. And to Sandy's point, Bruce Henson, I was scared to death of him at KGOU because smoking was still allowed at that time. And smoke filled every room. So we ran to the newsroom to get away from the smoke. But years later, as an RTNDA board member and executive committee member, I was at the RTNDA convention, and Bruce came up to me, and he was in failing health. And I thought, well, he doesn't know who I am because I'm just the kid that was on the radio station, and he can't possibly, and he came up and he goes, Janet, I'm so proud of you. And to know that your professor and somebody that you worked hard for recognized what you did, we don't do this to get rich. We don't do this to become known. But when they come back and tell you that they're proud of you for what you did for the University of Oklahoma, that's the best, and that's bringing it forward. And my final comment is that some of us in these stages of life, I'm only 51, and 51 is young ladies, okay? But what happens is the body does different things, and so I'm disabled. But Jane does such a great job, Jane Polly does, on the Today Show about what to do with your life, how to change it, how to modify it, how to rethink your life. And that's the lesson. You can rethink your life because I'm disabled in this, but my mind has not quit and the skill set hasn't quit. So you learn how to repurpose yourself. And so that's my biggest end story there, Linda, is that there are other ways. You will go through cycle after cycle of your career. But the training you get here will make all of it work, including being a mom, including being a wife, and how to be the best advocate for any cause that comes along in your life.
Well said. Well said. Don?
I'm Don Davis. I graduated in 1965, same as the general, although he sure's got a lot of gray hair, and I don't have that. And I haven't. But I came to the University of Oklahoma as a sophomore. My first year here, I rose to the top of my class in partying, drinking, road trips. Was very good at that. In fact, had earned quite a reputation on the campus for that. I was a government major, though, and that was just really, really boring, and I didn't much like it. So my mother referred me over to a fellow named Stuart Harrell, who had started a few years earlier a public relations program in the journalism school. And so I went by to talk to Professor Harrell about that and see if that might be of interest to me. It sounded to me like it was a fun thing to do and probably would be helpful. So I became one of Stuart Harrell's students. I, in fact, became totally immersed in the School of Journalism. There's really nothing I can say to tell you of the tremendous love and outreach that I felt from people like Stuart Harrell, from Louise Moore. Now there's a saintly person who taught us to gather facts, to ask questions, to be fair, to do what was right, to be accurate, to be fast. And I later was a sports editor of the Oklahoma Daily. I applied for editor, but people still remembered some of my past. And so they thought it was probably not a good idea to ever turn me loose with that. So Bill Hancock and I worked for Harold Keith, who is truly, truly one of God's noblemen. And we had a great time there. Really, the things I learned in the empowering storytelling, because that's really a wonderful phrase, Joe, because that does describe what we do and what I think the University of Oklahoma at least taught me to have a vision, to think that there are lots of things you can do if you'll gather your facts, if you will be right on them, if you will act boldly on them, and if you can tell your story and convince people that you are right and get the support there. So anyway, I must say that the University of Oklahoma has had one of the most profound effects on my life of anything.
Thank you, Don. Beautiful. Great. Thank you.
And we have time
I think we have time for one or two more. Paula Evans Baker, what year did you graduate?
1958. I'm one of the few people who remembers the old building, the nuclear engineering building, where we went to school and had manual typewriters and van, and a lot of stories have been told about some wonderful professors that really influenced me, especially Louise Moore. But I came into the journalism school sideways because I was going to be a French major. I had vowed that I was going to be a French major from the time I was 8, and my father was killed in France. I was going to find out what happened, and then I was going to work for world peace. And I did not have many good prospects of being a beauty queen. Had to do it another way. So I started out as a French major. I discovered that French majors were not much fun at parties because they were always arguing about where they put the negative. And I fell in with a bunch of journalism majors, and I thought, those are party people, you know. So I also, in taking classes to spend more time with these fun people, I discovered I could write, could communicate in another way. And so I ended up with what they called a general editorial degree, had a scholarship, spent a year at the University of Geneva where I did work on my French, and then came back to work on the transcript because I like blue skies, and you will not find one in Geneva, Switzerland. And so I put that aside for quite a few years, and then after I retired, I began to research my father's death, kept my French going, and then became acquainted with a journalist who now works for the Department of Archives in the Department of Meurthe and Moselle in France, which is the region where my father died. And so we began to work together because we were both trained as journalists, and we could communicate. I can tell when he's writing a story where he's going to go in French, and vice versa. So I accepted his invitation to visit him and his wife and get acquainted with some of the other people in the Lorraine region of France. And so I was over there. I did not know that they were going to dedicate a plaque to my father at that time. I was over there in the second week of September 2011. My pen pal and I had just come out of the Palace of Peace in Verdun when the call came, "Turn on your radio, Jerome." And so he turned it on, and that was my first news of the bombing of the Twin Towers. Mm-hmm. There I was in France with people I had spent only 2 nights with and had never known before, although I had emailed for a year and a half. And so Jerome turned to me and said, "Paula, will you speak?" Because he knew I remembered Pearl Harbor. I was from the city that had the greatest bombing until then. And so I said, "I have to," because I had worked in the OU media office. I knew how you always looked for a foreign student to get their viewpoint. And I'm still a very active journalist at age 77.
Oh my goodness, good for
That's
you.
amazing.
It's amazing.
That's a really inspiring story, and it provides a nice transition to General John Admire, who was acknowledged today as one of our distinguished alumni. Maybe you have a short story you'd like to share.
Thank you, Bart. I graduated again in 64 and then 65, and that in itself is kind of an interesting story because when I was scheduled to graduate in 64, Dr. Holland called me in his office, and I thought, oh, I'm in serious trouble here. I'd never been in his office before, and asked me why I wasn't going to graduate school. And I said, well, Dr. Holland, I mean, virtually every cent I ever had went into paying for my undergraduate program. And he said, well, we have a fellowship here. And I said, yes, sir, but, the deadline is passed. And he said, well, forget the deadline. If you'll apply, the scholarship or the fellowship is yours. So I attended graduate school and had the good fortune to be a graduate assistant with Mrs. Moore. And she was the mother to all of us, to be quite honest. She treated all of us as her children, and I think we treated her pretty much the same. But that was the overwhelming sense that I had when I attended the university. The J School became my home, it became my family. I did my very best, and I had a certain latitude with courses, having completed a lot of the undergraduate prerequisite to the other courses, that I could pretty much schedule my course day so that my first class in the morning, even if it was at 8 o'clock, was going to be journalism. my last day my last class in the day was going to be journalism. I thought that was a great way to start the day. It was a great way to end the day. And of course, a lot of that time was in the J-Lab, particularly working with people such as Linda. I'd been in Vietnam 2 or 3 months, and it's pretty lonely, and you're away from home, and you're in an environment in a combat zone. And back then, no cell phones, no phones. Basically, the only way you heard from home, your connection with what we call the real world was just postal mail. And so every day, every other day, when it was convenient, you'd see the little orange fluorescent mail bag come trudging up the hill with mail and you would just be praying that there was a letter in there for you. And one day there was about 10 mail bags, and I was watching this wondering, what the hell's going on? And we've never received that much mail in our life. And Linda and these girls had arranged it somehow with a care package, and there was sodas, there was candy bars, there was chips, things that we hadn't seen in months. But that was the nature of the friendships. And I was so touched when Mrs. Moore wrote me while I was in Vietnam, Dr. Holland, even Dr. Whitaker, who's everyone in here said that he's kind of the person everyone kind of loved to hate because his classes were so hard. But once you had him, you hated to love him. You absolutely loved him. He was such a great professor and taught you so much that you had so much respect for him. And that respect was love. But that's the way a lot of students felt towards the faculty, I think. And that's one thing I see in the school today is the relationship between students and the faculty is still family, and I think it's still home. And I think the university, the college, that's the one blessing I think that I take away from and I remember from all of those years is a sense of home and family in the J School.
Thank you, John.
Just quickly, just how we become interconnected years later. When I was embedded in 1991, Desert Storm, with the Marines, the commander of the unit I was embedded with was Colonel John Admire. And I can remember, and you probably don't remember this, but after the Marines, and we think Desert Storm was easy now, but we were supposed to take very heavy casualties. The chemical aspect of it, which is still rearing its head today. And our particular unit had a really tough mission. We were to cross that first defensive belt, so I embedded and I did my thing, and the soldiers, this was one of the first modern sort of embeds. Afterwards, I was talking to then Colonel Admire, and he told me, he said, I was skeptical about this. You probably don't remember this. But he said, I was a little skeptical about how this might work, but he said, in the end, he said it helped the morale of the soldiers because they knew if they fought and they died, their story was going to be told. And that still instructs me today, which you told me then.
And what better way to end this wonderful time together than with Dean Joe Foote, who's taking the young people now who will be taking our places into the future in such a magnificent way. We're grateful.
Well, I'm grateful for all of you being here today. Really an inspiring time. I must say, though, the Gwen Calvert talking about all the naked bodies in the Passion Pit made me realize what I was missing out on while working the weekend shift at KTOK. But as some of you have said, this theme, empowering storytellers, boy, was that brought home today in this meeting. It's been going on for a long time. We hope we can keep the tradition going for a long time. Our friend Bob Dotson, Linda, always says that stories happen only to those who can tell them. And boy, have we seen that today. And I'm very proud of everyone here and what they've contributed to the journalism program that shows why it's one of the finest in the country.
Well, on behalf of the Gaylord College, we thank you all for being here, and you're the best.
Well, it's a pleasure to be with you, Linda. I've admired you for many years. And, I think about this room full of people, and one thing that I take away from today is it's a room full of leaders. And I've always felt that you can never be an effective leader unless you're an effective communicator. And people might do it differently. Gandhi did it differently than Steve Jobs. But they still were very effective at communicating their vision which made them great leaders. And so today I'm going to take away from this that what I got the most out of this school was a sense of a skill set and a foundation that allowed us to be great communicators, great storytellers, and great leaders.
We were lucky people.
Thank you.